Take a network break. We're pleased to welcome John Till Johnson as guest commenter. It's going to be a good show and probably a long show, so you may want to pack an extra virtual donut or two. We're going to talk about AI announcements from HPE, rare earth minerals in Norway, a dip in data center switch sales, and more. Just a reminder, we put out 2 weekly newsletters here at Packet Pushers. The first is Human Infrastructure, where we gather the best technical blogs and resources from around the internet, along with new product announcements and some high-quality memes. Second is Packet Capture. It's a weekly digest of all the podcasts, blogs, and videos that we've published for the week. Both are free to subscribe at packetpushers.net/newsletters, and we never, ever share or sell your contact info because we wouldn't do you like that. Stay tuned after the news. We have a sponsored Tech Bytes conversation with NLIX. That's an internet exchange based in the Netherlands. They recently upgraded to 400 gig gear with Nokia. That's our sponsor for the episode. We're going to talk about why they chose Nokia hardware and silicon, including network performance and power efficiency.
It was all about power.
And before we get to
I remember that interview. It was all about the power. He almost upgraded the network completely just for power efficiency because of the savings. It's an odd discussion, but worthwhile listening to.
Absolutely. So last week, the floodgates opened apparently on the FUs, the follow-up. So we've got several to go through. So let's dive right in. First, Greg, recently you said that CBRS was a citizens band-based CB. It's actually not that. And so
it's citizens broadband.
Citizens broadband.
I didn't. Yeah, my mistake. Having a bad time. I mean, I am leaving. This is my second last show, or what do they say? The penultimate show. There you go. Fancy word. Penultimate show. And I am serious about my brain function isn't what it was. You are quite correct. It is Citizens Broadband. I don't remember what the RBS stands for. So, and I don't think Citizens Broadband has been as widely used as people thought, in the sense that like CB radio or ham radio has been very useful in emergencies in different places. But this is the spectrum allocated to Citizens Broadband. So maybe what I said last week was, it's not being used. And I would still go along with that sort of thrust of the conversation, saying if it's not being used, should we use it? Maybe. But then we'll talk more later on in the show about unused spectrum.
A second follow-up, in the last episode, we had talked about Fortinet buying a CNAP company called Lacework. We had mentioned that this kind of diminishes Fortinet's marketing message of we have a single OS, we run all our products off it. Somebody wrote in to say, Fortinet buys at least one company a year. They integrate everything into their platform or OS. This person also said, I don't think their marketing message has been, we make it all ourselves for many years. I've worked with them as a partner for 10 plus years, and the closest they come to this type of messaging is around their internally developed custom ASICs. For my part, I'll say I do talk with Fortinet quite a bit. I feel like they kind of still do lean into we have a single OS that runs our portfolio as a differentiator, although this person and myself are probably different audiences for Fortinet, so maybe we get different messaging.
Yeah, I think I actually said, and I'm usually fairly careful about this, generally Fortinet doesn't acquire outside companies. And I would say that once per year sits within the side of that statement. I'll do a follow-up to the follow-up though, Drew, which is that their ASICs were actually an acquisition. It's just so far back that most people don't remember them. I recall chatting to a founder who actually built a type of ASIC that had a very unusual internal architecture, which Fortinet acquired, and that became their ASIC team. Now, over 25 years, you could argue that there's nothing left of the original one, but there you go. They weren't totally internally developed, but they did iterate. I think this person's point is that they integrate everything into their platform and OS. So even though they might buy a technology, it's all integrated. They don't leave it like sitting as orphan Annie, like over at Cisco, for example, where Thousand Eyes is here and App Dynamics is over here and Splunk's over here, and they all do the same thing, and the overlap is significant. Fortinet says, no, we bought you for Thing, and we're going to integrate you, and they tend to do that at speed and without disruption to customers. And I think that's more of what I'm driving at. And I would argue that Lacework in this case is not congruent with any of their existing products. And the products where it is congruent or overlaps will probably be rationalized fairly quickly, in my view, because that's what they usually do.
Yeah, I will also say they do have a security fabric, so they can integrate or work with third-party products as well, and that security fabric could come into play with acquisitions. Lacework is a SaaS offering. I doubt Fortinet is going to try to port Lacework over to their FortiOS, although I assume down the road there will be integrations between Lacework's dashboard and various Fortinet management and SOC dashboards.
I would think inside of Fortinet there's a pretty strong movement to make sure everything's on the same internal code base so that you don't end up with, the problem that other vendors have, like, Cisco's the one that comes to mind again because I know more about what happens inside Cisco than most. They'll have various code bases for different OSs and, the security firewalls, there's 3 different operating systems in the routers, there's 5 different operating systems, and they never converge. They keep them separate, and that causes problems because internally, if you want to transfer a programmer from this team to that team, you can't because they've got very few transferable skills. And it's usually easier to just sack them and go and hire new ones and train them in the new thing rather than try and transfer them internally. Whereas my perspective on Fortinet is that they tend to say, okay, well, we've got to get this onto a common code base as quickly as possible, or, as quickly as is reasonable. And they tend to hand in that direction.
I would generally say yes. I think that's not going to happen with Lacework because it is a SaaS product and it's got a huge data lake already. And I don't think they're going to try to mess with that code base.
What I think about SaaS is it can go off and live in the cloud. And as long as it appears in the Fabric dashboard
Exactly.
It's where the overlaps and the interoperability comes in. If they don't get that seamless, as long as if it looks like an orphan Annie, that's where the problems start. If the data doesn't integrate, or the lateral integration, east-west integration, however you want to say it, that's where the problems come in.
Yeah, I see a dashboard level integration, not a code base down at FortiOS for this. And slightly related to Fortinet CNAP, there was a throwaway comment made in that Fortinet CNAP discussion that this allows Fortinet to outcompete places like Checkpoint and Cisco. This person wanted to write in to say they can't speak about Cisco, but Checkpoint, they do believe they have CNAP in the portfolio and may have been one of the first network security vendors to do that. And also Palo Alto Networks, and now Fortinet. He doesn't believe he's seen anything from Cisco. So he also notes Checkpoint is a good engineering company, not so good at marketing, and maybe that's why we weren't aware of Checkpoint having the CNAP offering.
Yeah, no, I was aware that Checkpoint didn't have CNAP until very late. It's only very recent. And it took them a long time to turn it into something. I remember talking to somebody about it, and they were complaining quite bitterly that Checkpoint couldn't organize a drink at a brewery sort of thing. And I mean, that's been my experience with Checkpoint for a very long period of time. Is Checkpoint does not move early. It's very slow. It's very backward. It doesn't move quickly. It only moves when it's forced to. I think the most generous way I can describe Checkpoint is it's very profit focused. So it's profit first, and it has to make profits. And if they have to spend money to do something, they generally won't. And so they did make an acquisition for a CNAP. It was a very, very small, unknown, invisible company, and I believe they've been working internally on scaling it up since then. So I would go back ahead of that. I would go against that follow-up and say that's not my impression at all, based on my recall of this sort of thing. But I would also point out that I worked with Checkpoint products for about 10 years or so in the early 2000s, and I just refused to work on them ever since. Without a doubt, Checkpoint was the company with the worst hassles, the worst bugs, the worst manuals, and the most lousy tech support out of every company that I experienced. Now, some people did tell me that it's possible to have a positive experience with Checkpoint, but you have to have achieved some sort of blessed status that elevates you to a special access. Do you remember that? That's sort of like that 1990s, early 2000s thing, Drew, where if you had enough CCIEs or enough Juniper certifications, you could have blessed access to the tech support or manuals and things?
That's sort of like having the right credit card. You get the special super premium credit card, and then you get concierge services. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I was never one of those blessed people. I was a normal person. And when I had, dozens of vendors to manage, and you don't want to pass dozens of exams to become an unpaid employee of Checkpoint and do their work for them, then my view is that Checkpoint is not for you. And I haven't seen anything to suggest that their approach to business has changed. I'm all for companies making a profit, but when companies make a profit at the expense of the customer's network, I am generally feeling that they're not a company that you should be considering, unless for some reason they've got something that you want, or you're particularly attached to them as a vendor or whatever. But that's just my feeling. Checkpoint, I don't believe Checkpoint was an early mover in this. It's a very late mover, if at all.
Well, another opportunity for follow-up if you have a different experience with Checkpoint. All right, our last follow-up before we get on to the news. Last week, we talked about a new Nexus Hyperfabric AI cluster announcement from Cisco. Brings together Cisco switching and compute plus NVIDIA processors and third-party storage for companies to build AI infrastructure. Cisco SE wrote in to say, this FU is for the Hyperfabric portion of the show. A few corrections for what was said. It is not based on Nexus 9K switches. It is built on a new platform, Cisco 6000 switches that are based on Silicon One. This is not specific to AI data center use cases. It's just one of the use cases. The solution will be a cloud-managed fabric for greenfield deployments, as well as a few others. So the Nexus 9K switch reference, that was my mistake. The press release does say Cisco 6000 switches, but an accompanying blog references the 9K switches. And on closer reading of that blog, I realized the 9K switches are part of an AI bundle that includes Nutanix, which is different from the Nexus Hyperfabric. Although I will say in my defense, before we recorded the episode, I did search on Cisco 6000 switches, and I found a Cisco link that said the 6000 line had been EOL'd. I couldn't find any details about a 6000 line supporting 400 and 800 gig, which was referenced in the press release. So I just assumed there was a mistake in the press release. I should not have assumed, so that's on me. And if anyone has details on or links to this 6000 line that was referenced in the Nexus Hyperfabric release, I'd love to find out more.
Okay, so everything that you said, Drew, is absolutely right. I got exactly the same thing. The press release did not say hardware at all. And normally when Cisco releases new hardware, it's a leading item because it's where they can make money. They can flog that hardware, instant revenue, instant profits, right? And The thing that came out of it when I went back and reviewed the actual thing is this is not a fabric that's dedicated to AI. It's a fabric you can use for AI. And that's very hard to see how that will work, given that AI has very specific needs to perform at the levels that you're expected. I would argue that the things that you need, like Rocky V2 and so forth, and the integrations with DPUs and SuperNICs are what you need to qualify. So this sounds to me like, smelly hobo move from Cisco. And what I mean by that is what Cisco's doing is decided that Hyperfabric is going to be the name of its AI fabric. Doesn't have anything that could be used for an AI fabric. So it's going to take some existing products that are out there. It's Silicon One ASIC, which is not particularly AI or anything, create a new range of switches that they're going to work on for the next 5 or 10 years to add AI features. And they're going to rebrand some existing assets for now so that they can say they've got an AI fabric for investors and for customers. And then it's going to be a couple of years. Now, this is a well-established practice at Cisco. Come out with a strategy and then go out and talk to customers about what that should look like. And then they'll start filling in the product strategy. And, my view is if you aren't managing the NICs at the edge in an AI network, then the network you're not in control of the network. You have to control at the edge of the network. You have to groom the traffic before it hits the switches. And then inside the switch network, you have to manage the whole thing from end to end. And Cisco doesn't have that. The best they can do at the moment is use Bluefield 3 DPUs. And that to me doesn't sound like a Cisco strategy because they can't put the features in there to do the control of the network. And the Ultra Ethernet consortium a long way away. So again, I think this is one of these, preemptive announcement. Cisco's going to have a hyperfabric strategy eventually next year or two, maybe.
Yeah, well, this will tie into our news conversations coming up, but there is right now in the traditional IT vendor market a concerted effort to attach yourself to Nvidia in any way possible, even if just by a press release, because there's right now Jensen Huang and Nvidia are King Midas, and everybody wants him to touch their portfolios with his golden touch. But let's dive into the news now. HPE hosted its annual Discover conference, which did generate some news. First, HPE wants you to know it's partnering with Nvidia on AI. The company announced HPE Private Cloud, which includes hardware and software for companies to build the infrastructure to develop and operate Gen AI. HPE Private Cloud is going to integrate NVIDIA GPUs and NVIDIA Ethernet switches, plus HPE ProLiant servers and HPE GreenLake for file storage.
Yeah, this is pretty much the way that you would expect it. Everybody wants to sell NVIDIA. And I'll give you a secret as to why NVIDIA wants to sell their products through the others. I think I've worked it out. And at least I've got an idea of what you might be looking for. There are 3 markets for AI generation. You want to build your own, you want to rent it from a cloud provider, or you want to buy a hyper-converged pre-bundled solution. HPE is selling you a GreenLake AI factory. Dell calls it an AI factory. But basically, you're buying a pre-configured solution, and it's going to include a bunch of NVIDIA stuff. Now, is that GPUs? Is that DPUs? Is that NVIDIA? Is that going to include the Mellanox switching? It doesn't say. None of the details or the white papers or anything contains any information about what's actually included in here, which makes me think like something's coming down the poop chute on this. Like we're not 100% sure, and we don't know about availability, and we don't know what customers want. AI is still very new, and everybody's worried about the AI bubble bursting. It's become much more of a thing in the last 2 or 3 weeks for people to be worried about, is AI a bubble and is it going to burst? We're seeing a lot more AI negatives coming out where people are saying they're abandoning AI and so forth. One of the things that I did was I looked up some of their white papers, Drew, and I've got to say they produced a white paper which is in a class of its own. Did you look at this white paper?
And I'm guessing it's not a good class.
Well, it depends. It's a let's generate as much smoke, use smoke and mirrors to generate as much nonsensical hype about something as it is entirely possible to do. And part of the challenge is they're citing a survey where they say 9 in 10 organizations have an official AI strategy in place. 94% of IT say AI has increased their security risks, and 80% of IT leaders are currently running their AI models on infrastructure they can manage. AI investments have paid off in terms of 42% have boosted operational efficiency, 32% have improved decision-making, and 30% have enhanced customer satisfaction. What is the message they're trying to get across? If you're not doing AI, you are missing out. So they're just...
So here's the thing. If you ask a sample of enterprise IT CIOs, how many are doing have an official AI strategy in place. The actual white paper says 98%. And I'm going like, there's no way. Like, I understand that the survey may have surveyed people of which nearly 100% of them are doing an AI strategy. You were probably having an AI love-in at an AI conference surrounded by people who were talking about AI. And if you asked them if the question, yeah, they're going to say this, but I don't
more
really
accurately,
think
this is... I would, having done this professionally for big chunks of my life, I would point out one thing, which is, for anyone listening, think about the number of times you filled out a survey, and think about why you filled out the survey, and think about what you said on the survey. I've looked at some 1,200 to 2,500 survey responses, and you can actually see the patterns of responses, like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Get me that Amazon card. Get me that Amazon card. What happens is you're looking at this and you're like, wow, look at this guy. He's the CIO of a $200 billion company. Wait a minute. What company would that be? And why is he taking their stupid survey for $20 Amazon gift card? And that's the challenge.
I just couldn't. I mean, this survey's so obviously out of skew. But here's the one that I really like. You said before that the AI investment has paid off and 30% have enhanced customer satisfaction. Now, let me just say to you, let's pretend, Jonah, that you're a CIO. Hi, Jonah. Let's spend 20 million on an AI strategy and we'll get 30% improvement in customer satisfaction. We're going to use unproven, unknown, nobody who knows anything about AI inside of the organization. And we're going to get it going and they're only going to deliver 30% of improvement in customer satisfaction. Yeah,
that sounds great, Greg. So you're telling me I have no idea what my infrastructure costs will be. I have no idea what my compute costs will be. I will be getting an enormous bill from the cloud provider if I'm using the cloud.
And I've got a 1 in 3 chance of enhancing customer satisfaction.
Oh, yeah, exactly. That sounds great. Where can I sign up?
Where can I sign up? Exactly.
So I think you get the picture that essentially what we're saying here is, no, we're not saying AI isn't important. But really, anytime you read a survey, you need to ask yourself 2 things. One is, how much can I trust this data? And more to the point, what is their goal in publishing this? And then ask yourself if you're skeptical of that goal, because the message here is, if you're not doing AI, you're missing out. You're lame. So they're trying to generate self-doubt in you. And you can let that happen or not. That's up to you.
Yeah. Just be cynical as you go in. There's just not a lot of information. I was looking for details on servers and what DPUs are they using, A100s, or are they, what are they doing for the networking? Are they using Ethernet or InfiniBand? I mean, HPE's got a strong InfiniBand presence in the HPC markets. I couldn't find any information about the actual deconstruction of this.
They did say it's Nvidia Ethernet switches, so that's the Mellanox line. Yeah.
Yes, that's the link. But yeah.
I didn't see that myself. I did look, but I think the main announcement here is that they're going through a network of system integrators. They talk about Deloitte, HCL Tech, Infosys, TCS, and Wipro. So basically what API, this is again, manifesting, the company's trying to manifest a future in saying this is the way the customer should go, and the hope that customers will jump on board. And that's probably reasonable. I think customers just need to be practical about this and say, this is an AI offering. Is this the one that I want for me? Maybe you need to carefully consider about what that looks like.
What's interesting to me is that how deep HPE is tying itself to Nvidia here. It's Nvidia GPUs, it's Nvidia switching. Considering that HPE has its own switching line and is about to acquire another company that has a very good switching line, but they are tying themselves to Nvidia Ethernet switches here, and Nvidia's AI enterprise software platform as part of this bundle, including Nvidia microservices for model inferencing. So HPE essentially saying, we're all in on Nvidia. This is our AI future, and we're tying ourselves to this ship.
I think they have to, because they don't have the necessary switching. They need, to build an AI cluster and have some sort of guarantee from Nvidia that it's not the network, right? You can't sort of partner with Nvidia and then say, because Nvidia is just going to say, you've got the wrong network. It just makes sense. If it's just an x80. Now, there is a backstory here. One of the things that I was thinking about this week is that Nvidia is currently making all of its servers based around ARM CPUs. Now, when the AI bubble bursts, which eventually it has to, it's just unsustainably large. I've been reading some financial reports that sort of pointing out that the bubble around AI is now 30% worse in investment terms than the year 2000. The 1990, late 1990s internet bubble. If you're an AI company, you're running 30x PEs off nothing, right? There's no revenue whatsoever. Anyway, so the point here is that if I'm Nvidia, what happens when that bubble bursts? What am I going to do? Well, maybe I'm going to go and start shipping x86 servers. Well, how do you get credibility as an x86 server vendor? I mean, for them to build x86 servers, not hard. They can either start their own CPU hard, go to AMD or Intel and say, can we build servers with your CPUs in it? And they're going to jump at them like a horse going after a carrot, right? They're going to be all over that. So if Nvidia starts selling hyper-converged bundles into the enterprise to compete against HPE, the best way to do that is to be selling them through HPE and Dell today, right? Uh-huh. So my prediction is that Nvidia will be selling x86-based servers once the bubble bursts, because that's the way to keep hardware revenues up when the time comes. And this is building credibility that, their GPUs, their storage, their networking is all x86 ready. And, and when the time comes, when the money goes the other way, when they've got enough headcount, when the internal business decides, they can just go out and say, hey, we've been doing it with ARM, but let's go with Intel. If that's what you want, we'll give it to you. Sure.
Well, and Drew, you were saying that, that HPE would have a lovely switch company of its own. Not so fast, says the British government. The British Antitrust Department announces that they have an investigation ongoing into the HPE acquisition of Juniper. The UK and Markets Authority announced on June 19th that it's investigating whether the proposed acquisition of Juniper by HPE will, quote, result in a substantial lessening of competition within any market or markets in the United Kingdom for goods or services. They're inviting comments through the 3rd of July and soliciting input from HPE and Juniper, and say they are going to make their phase 1 decision by 14 August. Since past CMA inquiries have actually caused or contributed to the failure of other big tech M&As, like Nvidia buying ARM, for example, this is actually non-trivial. What do you think, Greg?
I don't think it's a big deal. I think the UK has an election coming, and the incumbent government wants to be seen as to do something, anything. I mean, the existing government that's in power is going to lose massively. All the polls show that the entire Conservative Party here in the UK is going to be wiped out. Like, they're going to be basically left about 10% of seats, maybe if they're lucky 20.
So it's the exact inverse of decimated. Decimated is when you lose 1 in 10. Here you lose
exactly
9 in 10. Wow.
And so this is, if I'm in the government, I'd say, like, let's do something. Let's give us a headline. We're doing something about competition and things like that. And I think it's the second thing here is that this body tends to investigate anything over a certain size. It's more about a process thing. If you're going to do a large acquisition, the CMA is going to look at it. Normal, bit like the FTC in the US. It's going to look at everything. Once it gets over a certain size, they're always going to solicit comments so that nobody can come around later on and say, well, you didn't ask me. That's it. So I'm not worried about it at all. And I don't believe there's anything here that's going to stop this acquisition going through. It's priced in. All of the financial analysts' words I've seen say it'll go through. So this is just business as normal, in my opinion.
Yeah, I can understand why a regulatory body would want to look at a deal like this, because there is so much product overlap between the two companies. So maybe if they're assuming HPE's intention is to acquire Juniper and take all its products off the market to eliminate a competitor, I don't think that's HPE's intention, but I think they're just doing due diligence here. Even if that was the case, the markets they're playing in Wi-Fi and switching and so on are robust enough that I don't see this regulatory body trying to put a halt to the acquisition.
Sounds good, guys, and you've both convinced me on this one.
Okay. One final thing is that HPE has a lot of headcount in the UK, particularly in the storage area, as I understand it. So they have a significant set of research labs around the country, and they draw heavily on UK workers. So that might be a part of the factor here. Well, they want to make sure those jobs don't go anyway.
Exactly. They may have to do some horse trading behind the scenes. So anyone who's listening and disagrees, please let us know in the follow-up. And we'll move right along to another interesting news nugget, which is the data center switch sales dropping. Deloro Group, which is one of the good ones out there, has said that that data center Ethernet switches have dipped in the first quarter of 2024, with most vendors seeing declines, with the notable exceptions of Arista, Huawei, and some white box sellers. The white box sales are driven by increased demand from hyperscalers. This is actually the first quarterly decline since COVID. So this is potentially actually foundational. And the only category of switches in which sales increased was high-end switches supporting speeds above 200 gigs. Greg, what do you think?
Mostly this is about AI in the sense that, well, there's a few things going on here. There's a generalized downturn. Enterprise IT is down 5 to 10%. Mobile telcos generally are down 20% this year. Their CapEx spending is all receding. And so data centers are naturally going to stop. But if I was across the board of enterprise IT, I'm looking at AI thinking, does this mean something to my servers and my infrastructure refresh? And maybe you put some holds on that. Maybe you hold up spending budget on switches because you're thinking, you know what, there's going to be some AI switches coming eventually. My guess is about 2 years out. So you should spend your money today. And the other thing about AI Ethernet is it's going to be very small. you're only going to be doing it for a couple of racks. You don't want AI switches to cover your whole data center. You just want where the AI is to have the AI networking, and all the other stuff should remain unchanged. That's my view. Don't run around. But enterprise IT is nothing if not irrational and trend following and fashion following. And so they'll go, oh, we don't know what's happening and we're thinking about a mass, blah, blah, blah. No, but that's what's going to happen is you're going to see data center sales drop. I also suspect that a lot of companies who've been buying data center switching now putting a pause on this as they decide what to do coming ahead, because cloud growth is slowing. So the off-prem clouds, which drive a lot of the market at the moment, have slowed from 40% growth to 30%, and they're now sub 20% growth. And so that makes sense to me that data center switching sales are starting to slow.
Well, that actually doesn't make sense to me at all, because the category of switches in which sales increased was the hyperscalers, which is cloud infrastructure. That's basically who it is. So essentially what you're saying is even though cloud growth is decreasing, they're still buying more gear.
They increase by share or by value?
You were just saying that they were increasing. I'm just saying that they're buying more gear. And that's kind of the main thing.
They're buying more of the lesser value gear is what I read. So.
No, they're buying more of the higher value gear, the high-end switches. So that's the main thing. But I think the other thing you're leaving out, Greg, and it doesn't invalidate any of your analysis, it just sort of backs it up in a different way, is the impact of edge. Because there's an awful lot of research going on right now into how best to position AI workloads. Should they be in the data center? Should they be in the cloud? Should they be at the edge, which is a brand new thing? And they're trying to figure that out, and I anticipate that edge computing is going to have a surprise bump in the next couple of years as people realize that it actually is very helpful for certain AI applications and others.
My guess is this is part of the long-term post-COVID digestion phase. So there were lead times on new gear, got really long during COVID. Companies ordered a lot of equipment for network refreshes and to support hybrid work. And then as the supply chain restrictions started to ease, companies found themselves that they had a lot of gear on hand. So new orders started to dip while they digested what they've already had. And in fact, we'll talk about HPE's financial results toward the end of the show that came out in, as an explanation for why they were seeing a dip in their infrastructure, in their intelligent edge thing, because customers had gear on hand and they're just going through the gear they've already got before they start ordering new stuff.
That's pretty insightful, Drew. I think you're right. Yeah.
And I'm not surprised to see high-end switches sales staying up either for future proofing or because, hyperscalers are obviously building out their AI infrastructure. If enterprises are thinking about building out AI infrastructure on-prem, you're going to buy a 400 gig switch for that, obviously. And even if you decide not to go down that AI path, you sort of future-proofed with that 400 gig. So I'm not surprised to see high-end switching sales not dipping.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's just evolution. Standard evolution could explain quite a lot of this, along with the, post-COVID oversupplying. I mean, there are probably still people that have closets full of toilet paper in the U.S.
No, well, Cisco's financials are down $2 billion a quarter post-COVID and they've just recently said that we've cleared the backlog and now their numbers are back to what they were pre-COVID.
Right. Yeah.
And, HPE, similar sort of thing. They all had a big spike during COVID and now it's deflated back to where it was before. So the interesting thing here is that the whole COVID spike was temporary, and that's why we're seeing declines across the board.
As it should be. I think everybody got scared, Drew, and as you said, they sort of overpurchased. But moving on, the partnership seems to be kind of a theme of the show. So the next announcement is that Prosimo partners with Palo Alto Networks on securing its multi-cloud networking. Prosimo has made a deal with Palo Alto to allow enterprises to route traffic to or from their transit points via Palo Alto's Prisma Cloud for next-gen firewall services. Basically, the deal here is that Prosimo is trying to supply contextual information to the Prisma services to allow them to make security decisions correctly. And the end goal with all of this is to let people implement zero trust across multiple clouds while also using use-based scaling of the firewall functions so that you don't have to over-provision. What do you think, Greg?
Well, I think Prosimo is late to the market in some ways. Like, it was a reasonably late startup to emerge in this sort of multi-cloud networking space. There was quite a few companies ahead of it. And I think if they're going to catch up, they're going to have to do something different. They can't just go out there and send the salespeople out and try and attract customers. They're going to have to do something a little bit different. And one way is to go and partner with bigger customers. So if Prosimo, a relatively, modest-sized partner, right, modest-sized company, could partner with Palo Alto. And so the question then becomes, well, what's in it for Palo? I think Palo Alto's growth has been just extraordinary over the last 5 years. They've cycled up from a $10 billion company to a $50 billion company. Sales has increased quite substantially. That comes with growth problems and all that sort of stuff. So I think that's one side of it. Palo Alto might be looking to Prosimo to say, like, why don't you take some of this work from us because we're sort of struggling. But the other thing that this has also got the stink of a customer There's a single large customer stink about this that says, you know what, I will buy your product, Mr. Prosimo, but only if you've got Palo Alto firewalls somewhere in this stink in here, because that's our security policy and they must be there, blah, 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 blah. And then they went on to say, not only is it enough for you to find a nasty, hacky workaround, we need to see a serious commitment between you and Palo to make this deal work. And the customer sort of jammed them together. And, and that partnership must be serious. So this looks like Palo Alto and Prosimo have a customer who's big enough to bash them around a little bit. But you know that here at Network Break, our constant theme is if you're going to have a partnership, you should just put a ring on it. In other words, Palo should just go and buy Prosimo and do it. And seriously, the customer in the middle must really, really want to take a risk here in the sense that, if Palo Alto couldn't do this itself, which I think or they decided that Palo Alto's tools for this weren't good enough and Prosimo's was better. I wonder if it's smart to be caught in the middle like this. So put a ring on it is where I would put my money if I was a customer.
We haven't seen a lot of big vendor activity in multi-cloud connectivity. It is right now the realm of the startups like Prosimo, Alkira, Aviatrix. So maybe this is the sort of rumblings in the ether that acquisitions are on the way, and Palo Alto is doing a little dating with Prosimo to see about this, because I think there's going to be more appetite over time for simplified multi-cloud connectivity solutions a la Prosimo and others. And of course, security is going to be a major part of that. It's great for Prosimo to say Palo Alto is our customer because Palo Alto is a very large, comfortable, expensive brand name for their customers. So great for Palo Alto. And yeah, maybe this is hints of a tie-up coming along.
Well, and I think, Drew, one of the other points that you're making, I think is important to keep in mind, which is this multi-cloud networking or network as a service offering is starting to ramp up. I mentioned a couple shows back that Alkira just got $100 million Series C funding, which, again, is nothing in the AI world when you're getting billions here and billions there, but it is pretty significant in the infrastructure world because you don't usually see that kind of investment. And I anticipate that the vendors you mentioned, Aviatrix and Alkira, are going to start making a bit more news themselves along with Prosimo as things shake out over the next couple of years.
And if they do, we will get to tell you about it on Network Break. All right, we've got some other news pivoting back to HPE. They also announced an expansion to their hybrid cloud portfolio with KVM-based virtualization for HPE Private Cloud. The private cloud is built on HPE compute, networking, and storage. In reading the announcement, VMware isn't mentioned anywhere in the HPE blog announcing this KVM support, but I feel like it's the subtext there. If you're considering a VMware alternative for private cloud, HPE wants you to come and talk to them.
Yes, they announced KVM hypervisors as part of the package for the, wait for it, HPE GreenLake Private Cloud Business Edition. Got that, Drew? No, I'll have you know I had to practice that just to get that out. To quote, to help address these demands, we're excited to expand our hybrid cloud offerings with HPE virtualization capability for HPE Private Cloud. Goes on to say combines open source kernel-based virtual machine, KVM, with HPE's innovative cluster orchestration software to support the high-performance blah, blah, blah. The rest of it's all verbiage and the things that you want. So basically what they're saying here is that we are announcing support for open source KVM virtual machines or KVM hypervisors inside of the cloud thing. Now, the timing might create an impression that this is a reaction to the VMware by Broadcom licensing changes that we've had. But I think this would have been a long-term project, Drew. This is something that they've been working on for a long period of time, and it's come to fruition. Of course, they had to wait for their conference. They probably could have announced it 6 months ago, but they had to wait for HPE Discover to get lost in the announcements, and it was very difficult to actually pick this out until I sort of dug around for it. But my thing here is that, HPE already owns everything around the hypervisor, storage, hardware, networking. They've got the cloud dashboard. They've got the provisioning tools. They've got the subscription licensing, the GreenLake, buy as you consume type stuff going on here. And it was always obvious to me that the best way to chase some cost out of this was to switch customers from the ESX hypervisor to a KVM, if that's what you want. And doubly so when KVM has proven its reliability in the off-prem cloud providers. So I don't see this as a na to VMware or Broadcom, although it absolutely is. But I reckon customers are asking for this, Drew. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm sure. The customers have been asking for this. It just happens to coincide very nicely with VMware having some trouble with its new changes and maybe customers looking for alternatives. It's an alignment of the stars here.
I think VMware has the new VMware, the VMware by Broadcom has a very different vision to what's happening here. They are saying that we want all of our customers to be using VCF. The days of using ESX just as a hypervisor and then bundling it into someone else's private cloud or just using it standalone, That's not a market they want to be in. And if you as a customer have just been buying ESX for hypervisors and using vSphere to operate them, I think VMware has been fairly clear that that's not what they see the future as. That's not what the vision that they want. Broadcom said to shareholders 2 weeks ago, we've increased revenue at VMware by 700 million and we've reduced costs by 200 million. It's going great. So any delusions that you have that VMware is going to be what you want it to be is wrong. If you're looking for the way that we used to do it with KVM and blah, 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 with just hypervisors and you're sort of orchestrating hypervisors, you're going to have to look around. And this is where I think HPE is moving to. It's saying like, well, we've got something here. If you just want to have a simpler infrastructure, you don't want to have Tanzu and Kubernetes and, blah, 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 and all that sort of stuff, then we've got a solution for you with our Green Lake using KVM.
I would just agree with what Greg said for a change, just to be different.
It's happened.
So, Drew, it's interesting to point out here that there's definite parallels with how Nutanix got started. Like HPE has its storage, HPE has its networking. Nutanix originally started off with storage, and the ESX hypervisor went to KVM. So this is a time travel. What I do find a little bit weird here is it's notable that Cisco chose to go with Nutanix instead of choosing its own hypervisor. So really, there's only a handful of hyper-converged partners out there, HPE, Dell, and Cisco at this point in time for most Western companies. And even though Cisco has its own private cloud company, they still went to a third party, Nutanix. And that's a little confusing to me. Surely they would have had the chops to be able to say, yeah, let's do KVM. But then again, they tried that 3 or 4 years ago when they started up their HCI and then gave it up because it wasn't making enough money for them. Then they've turned to Nutanix to do it here. So, yeah, I think HP is sufficiently differentiated here to have a serious edge. Dell's still saying it's all VMware. We're only doing VMware. HPE's got a different pitch here. I wonder how many customers will listen.
All right, moving on. We usually don't talk about mining on the show, and I'm not talking about data mining or Bitcoin mining, but actually digging in the dirt. But a Norwegian mining company claims to have discovered what it calls the largest deposit of rare earth elements in Norway. The announcement didn't specify which elements, but says the deposit includes, quote, magnet-related rare earth used in electric vehicles and wind turbines. The company says pilots are underway to test the feasibility of drilling and extraction. First stage mining could start in 2030, and the company estimates it can meet up to 10% of demand for rare earth elements with this deposit.
So I just wanted to be a little self-congratulatory here. If you remember about 3 years ago, we were talking about rare earth shortages, and I said, there's no shortage of rare earths. There's a shortage of rare earth processing. And this is that. So this is Norway saying that they got up to 10% of the, some massive deposit of rare earth elements that they can now seek to mine if they want. And this proves that there was never a shortage of rare earth elements to mine. It's always been a shortage of processing because extracting the minerals is highly toxic. It uses really horrifying chemical processes. And the end point is these massive lakes of toxic sludge, which just sit around that you've either got to bury it in the ground somehow and risk it going into water contamination or put it into lakes and, whatever. I did see an article recently suggesting that there was some market manipulation around the rare earth metals. That may be what drove the price up. But I think it's very difficult to tell if Chinese government intention to guarantee its supply chain. So there was a definite move by the Chinese government to say, we need rare earths. We need them in China to support the manufacturing in China. And they gave a whole bunch of subsidies and benefits to companies who would go out and start extracting rare earths and processing rare earths. And I think that ultimately changed the pricing around it. And then investors got in there and started to run up the market when they realized that China had become the dominant player and they could run a narrative. So I think mostly this was the Chinese government intention to guarantee its supply chain, leading to a distortion in the market. And now we're seeing the market come back the other way. There's never been a shortage of rare earth. It's always about whether it was worthwhile doing it. And Western countries generally decided, we don't want toxic lakes of leachate everywhere. So,
yeah, I sort of wonder if that toxic element is why first stage mining is going to take so long. We're talking about 2030 before stuff comes up out of the ground. But I assume there are, environmental and labor controls in place in Norway that have to be taken into account to get this stuff out of the ground and actually process it.
Yeah, they're pretty serious about that. Yes.
Yeah. So another story from our corporations don't like governments, but they do like government money and power file. Intel is coordinating highway takeovers in the U.S. state of Ohio with the state's transportation department to truck hundreds of thousands of pounds of equipment for new chip factories being built in the state. Tom's Hardware reports that trucks will be carrying as much as 916,000 pound loads and traveling across Ohio at 5 to 10 miles per hour, causing road closures and traffic congestion.
If you want to close a road... Sorry.
I'm kind of scratching my head on this one, Drew. I understand your point. But honestly, Tom's Hardware also mentions that this is the equivalent of 76 elephants. And just as a side note, I do remember that back in the days when the Barnum and Bailey Circus used to parade elephants across bridges in Manhattan. And I remember one summer morning summer evening going out on my deck and discovering, holy cow, there's a parade of elephants right below me in the street. And the thing that is kind of putting on my BS detector a little bit is it's actually not that big a deal to parade 76 elephants. It's a couple of minutes of closure. I mean, we had more closures in the Obama years.
No, not in this case. They're shifting warehouse-sized pre-built chillers.
I know that's what they're saying, but really they're saying it's the equivalent of 76 elephants. They actually say that in the report. So in this case, it's really a rolling thunder. What's going to happen is different towns and truck stops are going to stop and take pictures, but it's not like they're commandeering the entire transportation infrastructure of Southern Ohio. They really are not.
These are pre-built.
I understand
these
what they
are fabrication rooms. They're
I understand
pre-built.
what they are.
Yeah,
Greg,
and you've got they chill and filter the air.
And
why they have to transport them's got me beat, right?
They have to transport them because they're pre-made and they've been fabricated somewhere else. But the point is, they're not. There are big loads, they're slow loads. We get it, but it's not a takeover of the roads.
It's 415 metric tons, which is quite a significant load to put on a truck. 5 to 10 miles an hour. They're also large enough that they're probably going to have to dismantle electrical wires. If you've got any overhead wires, you're probably going to have to.
They don't mention that. So I think
they don't mention that. But I'm saying
they did mention that in the article. But
they did. Okay.
Yeah, the Ohio Transportation Department in areas where power lines could be an issue already pulled them down and buried them underground. So that's kind of my read on this. This is not so much about government caving into big business, although certainly they are making a big deal about we're bringing all these jobs and blah blah blah. It's more about the really crappy infrastructure we have in parts of the United States getting shown up immensely, because I'm telling you, if you can parade 76 elephants across Manhattan without batting an eyelash, I think the issue here is not the 76 elephants and the pace of the thing. It's the issue here is the quality of the roads, and in fact, why did they even have power lines overhead until now? So
it's a bit like the rockets in Texas. They also move rockets across the roads in Texas, and everybody gathers around to look at them.
Exactly. But it's also the case that the infrastructure, the transportation infrastructure in Texas and in Ohio, although more Ohio than Texas, is lacking. Yeah. So the hope is that
my point would be is that having government buy-in here makes this possible. One of the big things that Intel got from Ohio was not just subsidies, but also a partnership with the government. And so it was able to go to the government and say, look, we're going to have to move this. You're going to need to make sure all the local authorities actually line up and don't stick spokes in our wheels. And it's just an example of how actually having government support makes certain things possible. It's not only the free money, it's also the process.
Yes, but no, I think you guys are reading way too much into it politically. It's more the case of, hey, you want all those tax dollars? This is what we need. Got it? Let's go. And that's really all there is to this. I think the more interesting thing is to highlight the fact that Intel is throwing, billions of dollars to chip manufacturing in the heartland, which is a really big gamble. And it's going to go one way or the other. This is a bet the company gamble that Intel is making, and it'll be interesting to see how it turns out.
I think my larger point is that companies like Intel and others will move heaven and earth to avoid paying taxes, but they also rely on infrastructure, public infrastructure like roads, power, and so on that we all need. So I just find it amusing when they have to partner with government to actually get things done because, as good capitalists, they tend to think they can just go it alone, and that's not the case. My little somewhat socialist hat on for the show, and I will now leave that aside.
So our next topic is that the U.S. federal government, the FCC, Federal Communication Commission, is considering letting FirstNet, which is a division of AT&T, run a big chunk of its emergency spectrum. So this is the Public Safety Spectrum Alliance, which is a proposal, the pre-meeting meeting. We have these in Ethernet, the old Ethernet Alliance, where they get together to make Ethernet so that they can go and then politically pressure somebody. So the FCC is entertaining a process from the Public Safety Spectrum Alliance to allocate the 4.9 gigahertz band to AT&T's FirstNet divisions. Now, this is the emergency response for spectrum. So 4.9 gigahertz has been sacrosanct in America for decades because that's where all of the radio equipment for first responders and emergency services work. And the assumption was that emergency services absolutely needed to have this to do their thing. And when they need it, they need it. And my problem here is that what you've got here is that in the case of US telcos, the level of regulatory capture they've got leads to the US government pretty much giving them whatever they want when they ask for it. And I mean, after all, Drew, that emergency spectrum is unused most of the time. It's just sitting around, not delivering value to shareholders, is it? So using that emergency spectrum for first responders might seem creepy to you and me, but why take a risk? But in America, where big countries making money is more important than human lives, absolutely take that emergency spectrum and use it for telcos so that they can sell more bandwidth.
No disagreement with you from me.
There you go. There's my rant for the day, Drew.
Yeah, you guys have your rants. I mean, the main point here is that Verizon is not on the record as opposing this arrangement because it's bad for consumers and it will be a threat to human lives. It's just we wanted that spectrum, damn it. Give it to us. That's
Nobody's
really
using
all.
it. I mean,
oh well, no, it's not.
Emergency services doesn't use it most of the time, John. Of course, it's free for us to, and but we promise we won't ever.
It's Verizon spitting at AT&T and AT&T spitting back. That's what it is.
Absolutely, yeah. Yes. Posturing between mega corporates to find a way to use the government to give them something for free, for sure.
All right, our last story for the news section is earlier this month, HPE released financial results for the second quarter of fiscal year 2024. HPE had revenues of $7.2 billion, up 3% year over year, and net earnings of $314 million, down over last year. By business unit, server revenue was $3.9 billion, up 18% year over year. Intelligent Edge, which includes wireless switching and SD-WAN, had revenues of $1.1 billion, down 19% from last year. And hybrid cloud revenues were $1.3 billion, down 8%.
And one question for you on that, Drew. You mentioned that revenues are down. Well, net earnings are down, but revenues are up, which means they're basically spending more money than they did last year. What do you think they're spending it on?
AI.
They're spending it on trying to get Jensen Huang to come to their, Discover thing and go on stage with them to get next to that Jensen Huang power.
That's a pretty expensive pretty expensive speaking fee. Fee. I'm saying, yeah. But.
Well, I think Jensen Huang likes speaking. He loves being on the stage and he loves being the center of attention. There's no question there. And he knows, and this goes back to my theory about Nvidia will be in x86s before too long. So getting up in front of HPE's audience and saying, hey, we've got our GPUs for you, implants in their mind that Nvidia could be their supplier. Right. So why wouldn't he go to HPE Discover's conference when he's still not a total competitor, he's only a partial competitor, and get involved? And he wants to make sure that Nvidia is well positioned. They've certainly got all the money in the world to do these things. But I think, when I look at the discussion that they had with the analysts, they're saying, we believe that we're going to get growth for servers. We're expecting improving GPU supplier. They think that AI will grow and give them more gross margin. Okay. Hard to believe, but okay. Hybrid cloud isn't going to grow any. Intelligent edge isn't going to grow any. So they're saying networking is only going to give slight sequential growth. This is, of course, for networking and for hybrid cloud, that is all on the back of the COVID bump. Everything's back to normal, low growth, static businesses selling the same thing all the time to enterprises. Enterprises is not going up. So there's really nothing going on here except that all the things that they said were going to go up forever aren't. And we're finding out just how bad the enterprise IT market is for these companies who had previously said we're all growth, we're all go. Cisco's got the same problem, by the way. These results are directly in line with what Cisco said. Dell had the same thing when we talked about their results 3 weeks ago. They're all on a downward slope because there's nothing that customers want to buy that makes them want to spend more or buy more of a particular thing, except for AI, and they're not rushing into that.
Well, you should read the analyst reports. I'm telling our listeners because it's all about AI. CEO Antonio Neri was very confident on the analyst call that AI was driving revenues and would continue to do so much that the company is raising its full year revenue guidance from 0 to 2% growth to 1 to 3% growth on the back of that AI spending. He also said that enterprise AI customers nearly tripled year over year for HPE. So I'm very curious what the starting number was. It was probably very low to get that triple growth, but they are seeing AI as driving revenue so much so that they're willing to increase guidance for Wall Street and take a bet on that.
Yeah. And I think that the story here really is compute up, networking down, and we are planning to spend money to make money is really the story, because revenues are up year over year. So that's it. That's the bottom line is revenues are up. Right. The problem is the earnings are down because they're going ahead and spending more money. Their internal costs are also up, and they're up higher than the revenues are up. And then if you look at the business unit, it's really about compute. Mm-hmm. Networking is tailing off on multiple sides. So it'll be interesting.
I think the big question for me is how much of AI sales is cannibalizing other sales. So if I'm suddenly selling AI servers, is that cannibalizing my other server sales? If I'm selling AI networking, is that cannibalizing my data center switches sales?
It doesn't matter, because server revenue was up almost 20% year over year, 18%. So I don't care whether they're selling servers for AI or servers for something else. Server business is doing great. It's the networking business that's tailing off. And the real question I'd like to understand is where they're spending the money to make money. Are they plowing more back into the server business, or are they plowing it into the money losing networking businesses, which could be interesting?
I think it's SSE. Why build a WAN? Why build an SD-WAN? Why build a campus when you can just go straight to SSE?
Yeah,
I did read an article this week that 50% of Dell's, this is now Ars Technica, and I'll put it in the show notes just as an outro type of thing. But Ars Technica got a hold of some internal Dell documentation. Dell demanded everybody return to the office. You can choose not to return to the office, but you forego all opportunities at advancement and promotion. And more than 50% of staff just said, fine, we're staying out. So if that's the case, your campus networks aren't exactly going anywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, that does wrap up the news portion of the show. Thank you for being with us for this long one. I hope you did bring extra virtual donuts. Stick around for our Tech Bytes conversation with Nokia. We're going to talk to Nokia customer NLIX about their upgrades to 400 gig and why they did it. That's coming right up. Today on the Tech Bytes podcast, sponsored by Nokia, we hear from Nokia customer NLIX. NLIX is a leading internet exchange based in the Netherlands. The organization recently redesigned and upgraded its network. Nokia played a role in that upgrade, including 400 and 800 gig routers and its FP5 silicon. We're joined by Dirk Kalkman, Chief Network Architect at NLIX, to talk about what drove their choice of Nokia, including performance and power efficiency, how Nokia is helping the IX deal with DDoS, and more. Dirk, welcome to the podcast. Can you give us a little background on NLIX, and then let's get into what drove the redesign?
Well, NLIX is one of the larger IXs in Europe, and we're the one that does it different than everybody else. We're the lunatics that thought it was a great idea to stretch an entire VLAN over the European continent.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so you can pair from Marseille to somebody in Copenhagen, and that's all okay.
Hey, routing is for people with no guts, no glory.
Yeah, so layer 2 is the way to go, but it's a challenge and a fun one at that. And it gives us a little bit of an edge. Expanding our network is much easier to do that. So when I came to the company about 5 years ago, we were still running the old switches, the Brocade MLX series, tried the Extreme SLX. But that was a horrible story for every exchange in the world that tried that machine.
Well, it was state of the art at the time, but I think the story really is the world moved on, right?
Well, the SLX was a little bit over-designed, right? So it could probably, if I would ask the guys from Extreme to make it a cup of coffee for me, they would probably program it in it. So it could do everything except what it needed to do, and it crashed the entire MPLS fabric, right? So it was a little bit of a horrible story. But we needed more power. The MLX 32 we had at the time was 64 times 100G in a full rack, so that's not scalable. So we went with to the major vendors, and we didn't choose Nokia at first. What most people don't know about NLIX, and that's a fun little fact, is that we actually run two networks. We have an A and B fabric. And that's especially for the enterprise. So completely separate, vendor separation. And we actually had the great idea to put Nokia at the B fabric and put a different vendor at A Fabric. So that choice was made, and we deployed the big machines of the vendor for A Fabric. I will not call it by name because I still want to have a good relations with them. And just,
but it didn't work. I'm guessing it didn't work out. So that's an interesting one. So you went multi-vendor. It sounds to me like you went multi-vendor so that, if you had a problem with one, you could rely on the other and, have a multi-vendor strategy and that sort of thing. But the flip side of this is you didn't have to go all in on one vendor. You had a rollout, a way to migrate. So the vendor A failed, but vendor B was there. So you kind of won.
So when vendor A AOL'd my network, we were really disappointed because we could only buy 1 and 10G line cards for our new shiny core that was supposed to be designed for 50 kilowatts. And the design was actually to go to 400 and 800G, where 800G was not announced officially, but was on the promise list. Mm-hmm. But we were already talking with Nokia. So we called Nokia, said we had a major problem, and we wanted to switch over. So push the vendor for Fabric A back to Fabric B, and push Nokia to the A Fabric. So Nokia delivered, and they delivered very well.
So there's an interesting thing in there. You're talking about power. You were saying that, Nokia was able to give you 10 gig, 100 gig, 400 gig, and 800 gig, and stay within this 50 kilowatt budget. And that's a major concern for you. That's not something we hear talked about much until recently.
If you look at our power consumption, it stays the same, but the amount of traffic goes up. So the power per gigabit goes down. And it's a massive amount of power, right? Because, and it's not just supplying the power that's the problem. The problem is cooling it. So we have about 50 kilowatts on a single rack, powered by 20 times 32 amp. And when you go to data centers with that power requirement, you get the difficult people at your desk, and they want to do heat calculations and other stuff, because they cannot cool it.
You actually end up buying 10 racks of space because it takes...
For
you're
example,
using 10 racks worth of cooling or something like that, whatever.
Even more, because we went to the data center. We said we want about 60 kilowatt because we need a little bit more for supporting services, but we want 60 kilowatt. How many racks can we get? So we actually got 24 racks just to cool it. And I only need about 6 or 7, right? Wow. So
you've got this big open space with 6 racks in the middle, and that's literally because the cooling is only. Yeah, that's very common. So what you're saying there to me is that Nokia is really focused on the power consumption angle, and that's a concern for you, but increasingly a concern for other people. Because when you're burning 50 kilowatts an hour or 50 kilowatts you're actually talking about real money. Like routers, you just draw power. Like your power bill is something, is what I'm trying.
Power in the data center isn't cheap. It's a lot of money. So if you want to do that and you want to grow, you have to look at your power consumption and overall, not just your router, but also your transport, your supporting services. Everything is important. The machines we have now can support about 216 terabits within that 50 kilowatts.
So how do you do that? What is special about Nokia technology that makes that possible compared to some of the other suppliers?
It was the main focus of their FP5. So their chip design was mainly focused on power reduction. So that makes it very efficient. So that helps us.
But it's a very modern chip, but it's also huge.
Yeah.
So whereas before you would have to have 2 or 3 or 4 boxes to get the same capacity, now you can do it in one.
Yeah, but it's a big one, right? We have the 14S systems, so it's a full rack, 12 line cards. But that's mainly due to port capacity. We try to, and that's one of the parts of the efficiency design. We try to connect as much customers to a single box as possible. For the simple reason, if I can handle traffic within the same machine, it's cheaper and more efficient. As soon as I have to transport to a different location, it's going to cost me money and it's going to cost power. So that's why we also chose for just 3 core locations within Amsterdam. I can serve almost any customer within Amsterdam with 800G and just have it a single hop away. So it's almost just one hop that I have to transport it. So that makes it that's also part of the efficiency design.
Right. I want to ask a question about software quality because a lot of customers may never have heard of Nokia as a router vendor, right? Now, no disrespect, Nokia has done it for decades. They've been providing it to telcos, but as an IXP, the software quality has met your expectations?
Yeah, it's a different beast altogether. If you're used to Brocade, you're used to, for example, Juniper or Cisco. CLI of the other vendors is much easier, but as soon as you understand the logic Nokia has put in their software, it's very easy to understand, but it's very much based on control. Right. But that's also the history of the telecom operators, right? They want to be predictable. So the software reacts in a very predictable way.
Okay, I want to go back to this power reductions because in the show notes, we've got some numbers here. You're talking about moving to the deployment of Nokia routers using the FP5 silicon, and you went from 0.8 watts per gigabit to 0.1 watts per gigabit. I assume the 0.8 was the extreme gear from the AMLX stuff down to 0.1. That is a lot of reduction. So that basically means you've got room to grow. So that data center that used to be like full capacity is now probably 20% capacity now, or something like that.
We're currently at about, the machine is currently running about 12 kilowatts. Right. So we're not even,
Was 50, is now 12.
Yeah, and we moved every 100G port to that machine. So the amount of connections on it, we are currently running about 200 connections on it. So that's not bad.
I wanted to ask about critical national infrastructure. Internet exchange points are now regarded as critical infrastructure.
Not everybody.
Does Nokia fit that model? Like, did you have to go through any hoops to get it approved, or was it just?
No, that was a check in the box. Because Nokia runs all the telecom operators. They already know with this. But actually, we're marked as vital infrastructure by the government. But that doesn't mean they actually have a say in what kind of equipment we run. It's more compliancy and certification. You need to have emergency processes. You need to have your business continuity in order. More that kind of stuff. Then you have to run vendor A, process. Vendor B. You're not allowed to run vendor C. That's not applicable to us.
So you mentioned Nokia. One of the reasons you looked at them was the power efficiency, but you also mentioned 800 gig. Is 800 gig something that you're using just for specialized deployments or something that you're using more widely?
It's not as much for the 800 gig per se. It's more the statement of technology. To achieve 800 gig, you need to have the 112 gig SerDes, and it just means you're ready for the future.
I see.
It means my box can run for coming 10 years.
Okay, so you were looking out longer, saying I have the capacity to get up to 800 gig if I need it.
Yeah. And I do have a few crazy customers that want the 800 gig. And it is also a talking point somewhere about the anti-DDoS. So we do deploy 800 gig, but commercial requests is still 0. 400 gig. Yeah, 800 gig, we don't see it. We don't see customers supporting it yet, and most customers stick with the 400.
But the point is that you're going at 400 now because that's doable. 800 gig is here. The equipment exists, but that doesn't mean that it won't be requested in the next 12 months, 2 years, 5 years. And that's the life cycle of the gear, right? If you bought gear that only did 400 gig, you'd be caught out.
Yeah, and the standard for 800 gig Ethernet was lacking a little bit. So the pluggables are now coming. It's more and more now being pushed as something that's more standardized.
So you just made an interesting comment there about DDoS, and I mean, it's obviously a real thing.
Yeah.
I never thought IXPs did anything about it, or do you?
We assist. Right. We have multiple scrubbing services connected with clean pipes to our network. So you can get a clean pipe to multiple scrubbers of your choice. That helps. We are working with Nokia to deploy technology that can actually do more. It's still a little bit on the development, and I don't want to share too much of it. It's one of the reasons why we chose the FP5. Their eChip has a massive filter capability, and we're seeing if we can unleash that onto the exchange. So that would be very
what you're
interesting.
alluding to there is you're going to start putting filter lists in there for known bad, which is not normal. Like when you're in an IXP, normally you just want to let the packets go. Right? You just want to let the packets go wild, right? And you don't want to get involved because that's someone else's problem, right? And when you talk about DDoS providers, having clean connections in, that's so that companies who are connected to the IXP can invoke those providers. Right.
You can your clean pipe. You can put your prefix to it if you have a subscription there, and they filter it. They attract the traffic, and you just get the clean traffic through your clean pipe.
Yeah, that's right.
But it sounds like what you're saying is similar to 800 gig. You see this FP5 platform as giving you options in the future if and when you need them.
Absolutely.
You're not going to do the DDoS, but there is a bunch of filtering that you could do to stop like basic stuff like bogons and stuff. Why?
Actually, we do the DDoS, but that's more of a testing subject. I'm involved with a government, a collaboration. That's the Anti-DDoS Coalition. And we actually once a year test the government infrastructure with on production environment with real life DDoSes, and NLEX is involved there to just transport it. But it's a massive amount of DDoS traffic. So we actually run into the terabits of DDoS traffic and see what happens.
Wow.
So that's a very interesting subject. You can talk about it for hours.
Yeah, you could. And it sounds a bit like it's a bit early and it's a bit confidential at this point as well. One of the things that we also talked about was you're not just doing IP routing, you're also doing optical transport for DCI. Does the Nokia support the DCI stuff, like to provide those overlays to provide L2 connectivity end to end?
Nokia won our RFP for optical supplier. That's how we got to know them, actually. It's one of the first contacts that I had with Nokia. Yes, they can do all the kind of optical transport you want. But the funny thing is, actually, when we started with Nokia, it was focused on the optical part. But actually, we ended up buying more IP equipment from them than optical equipment.
The optical stuff isn't as much as you think, especially now when you're in the era of putting coherent pluggables into the IP equipment, right?
Exactly.
So instead of the old days where you had like a DWDM switch and then you had a DWDM edge, which had an optical to an Ethernet, nowadays you can just plug a coherent pluggable straight into that Nokia and boom, that's your DWDM edge. And that changes the game substantially, like in terms of equipment, much less.
And in terms of power. So the amount of power you save by that, by just scrapping multiple boxes from your network, that's massive. And not only power, but also your management infrastructure, the amount of knowledge your operators need to manage an PSI or a PSS system. It saves a lot. Yeah, absolutely.
It also gives you one throat to choke, because if you're using coherent pluggables from Nokia in Nokia routers connected to Nokia, optical DWDM gear, then all of a sudden, support gets a little easier, or at least a little more focused, shall we say.
I must say Nokia is not the difficult one in that one. So if you have a third-party pluggable in it, your support case does not get rejected instantly. But yeah, for the coherent, we're going to choose the Nokia pluggables. And we're actually going to test it out between Frankfurt and Amsterdam. That's one of our first test subjects to do this. We're currently running 2.4 terabits between those two locations. So it's one of the best sites to choose if that's going to work. It's about a distance of 800 kilometers.
Yeah.
Well, Dirk, we've come to the end of our time. I think there's probably a lot more we could talk about, particularly around 800 gig and DDoS, but maybe we can have you back another day. Are you on LinkedIn if folks want to find you and follow you online?
I am on LinkedIn.
Okay, great. That's Dirk Kalkman. And we'll also have that link in the show notes that accompany this podcast, as well as links from Nokia if you want to find out more about what they're up to. But that does wrap up our show. Thank you, Dirk, for joining us. And thanks to Nokia for being a sponsor. Sponsorship ensures that Packet Pushers can bring you free, high-quality technical podcasts, videos, and more. Speaking of which, you can find this and many more fine free podcasts and our community blog at packetpushers.net. We've also got videos on the YouTube channel, the Packet Pushers YouTube channel. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, hear us on Spotify, and if you would, leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts. And last but not least, remember that too much networking would never be enough.